Huey, Dewey, and Louie are the three mischievous and adventurous nephews of Donald Duck and sons of his sister Della Duck. Alongside Donald and their great uncle Scrooge, Huey, Dewey, and Louie are some of Disney's most well-known and beloved characters, who found fame not only in animation, but in decades of comic stories. In 2019, the trio turned 82 years old, and in their 8 decades of existence, their look, design, and personality have evolved sporadically and drastically. In fact, the three Ducks spent most of their life without distinct personalities or designs, with no physical way to differentiate them until the late 1980s. In this video, I will trace the evolution of Huey, Dewey, and Louie right from their first appearance in the 1937 Donald Duck comic strip Donald's Nephews to their modern appearances today in 2019. To do so, we will look at the most drastic and important changes prevalent across more than 8 decades of shorts and series, touching on their most prominent comics appearances along the way. It's finally time to give it up for the Quack Pack in this edition of Explaining Disney. In 1934's Silly Symphony short The Wise Little Hen, the character of Donald Duck was first introduced to the world. The temperamental troublemaker would soon go on to become an audience favourite, eclipsing the popularity of Mickey Mouse. Naturally, Donald would soon also make the transition to comic pages, first appearing in the 1934 comic strip adaptation of The Wise Little Hen, then as a supporting role in Floyd Gottfredson's Mickey Mouse strips, and then in a number of other Silly Symphony strips. The Silly Symphony strips, drawn and inked by Al Taliaferro and written by Ted Osborne, would eventually be renamed and rebranded as Donald Duck strips, expanding the world and backstory of Donald Duck for the very first time, leading towards what would later become one of the most popular comic characters and universes ever. As part of the first expansions of Donald's world, Taliaferro had the idea to introduce 3 new side characters in the form of rascally nephews. Huey, Dewey, and Louie were thus born and made their debut appearance in a February 5, 1937 comic strip titled Donald's Nephews. In this strip, Huey, Dewey, and Louie appear in what are now their iconic colours, green, blue, and red. However, as they do in more recent times, the colours did not initially signify which character was which. Inspired by Taliaferro's ideas, the Disney Story Department transitioned the characters into the animated shorts, first debuting them on screen in the 1938 Donald's Nephews short. Carl Barks, who would later take control of the Donald Duck comics between the 1940s and 1960s, vastly developing the Donald Duck universe, claimed to have created the characters himself, as he was working on the Donald Duck shorts at the time. However, a memo from the Disney Story Department in 1937 recognised Taliaferro as the source of the original idea. In the Donald's Nephews short, Huey, Dewey, and Louie are sent to live with Donald, much like in the comic, and cause havoc around his house as they continuously prank him while he tries to pull them into line. The 3 appear here in the same appearances as they did in the comics, wearing shirts and baseball hats. However, here they appear in slightly different colours. Despite the characters mentioning their names, they still have no distinctive traits or designs, and would all be voiced by Clarence Nash, the then voice of Donald Duck. With a love for the characters, Disney Storymen wanted to make Huey, Dewey, and Louie recurring characters in the Disney lineup, and quickly. 1938's Good Scouts would see the 3 nephews on a camping expedition with Donald. Donald would lead the charge in taking the boys into the wilderness, but would soon find himself underprepared and ill-experienced. Huey, Dewey, and Louie, on the other hand, would show him up and outsmart him at every step of the way. The idea of this short, and a few of those that followed, including 1939's Sea Scouts and 1940's Fire Chief, would be to establish a more friendly rivalry between Donald and his nephews, with Storymen fearing that the more combative nature of their rivalry would become quickly tiresome to audiences. According to Carl Barks, the Storymen needed to broaden the characters by making them more interesting and acceptable. These 3 shorts would become known as the Donald in Charge But the Boys Know Best trilogy, in Barks's words, establishing the nephews as the brains of the family, and giving the Donald and nephew stories a softer edge. The shorts were all enormous successes, especially Good Scouts, which was nominated for an Academy Award and solidified the triplets as fan favourite characters. While the characters would become less combative, rivalry would still remain at the the heart of Huey, Dewey and Louie's relationship with their Uncle Donald, with many classic shorts seeing them come head to head with him in a series of friendly competitions and cheeky practical jokes. These shorts would include the unofficial sports trilogy, which would see the three outplaying a boastful Donald in a series of sporting matches, including golf, hockey and a snowball fight. Throughout their tenure in the classic shorts, Donald and the triplets would certainly share some loving, tender moments, living harmoniously together and enjoying each other's company. The rivalry between them would even be somewhat toned down in later years after Chip and Dale were introduced as Donald's main antagonists, and then later Pete, where in one short the trio can be seen supporting Donald in a boxing match. Having debuted after the advent of squash and stretch animation in the mid-1930s and Fred Moore's cute, realistic character designs of the 1940s, Huey, Dewey and Louie didn't go through enormous design changes, remaining practically the same throughout their 28 classic shorts appearances between 1938 and 1967. The only major differences the characters would see were wildly varying and interchangeable colour designs which changed from picture to picture, and continuously making it harder to discern one character from another. While this doesn't seem like a great way to build character, there was one simple reason behind this. Animators and storymen simply didn't feel the need to establish the characters as individuals in such short form stories. It would make film production longer, more tiresome and more complex, and it was simply easier to keep them all in the same ambiguous design. The characters would also often appear in themed costumes from time to time, and one short would even present them as rebellious teenagers. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, Huey, Dewey and Louie would appear in a number of classic television episodes of Walt Disney's anthology series, where their friendly rivalry with their Uncle Donald would continue and establish them as well-loved television characters. After 3 decades of sporadic appearances in Donald Duck shorts, Huey, Dewey and Louie would make their final appearances in a series of classic educational film shorts. 1961's Donald Duck the Litter Bug, 1965's Donald's Fire Survival Plan, and that same year's Scrooge McDuck and Money, alongside their great Uncle Scrooge for the first time on screen, marking their final appearance in animation for almost 20 years. Following their establishment and popularity in animation, Huey, Dewey and Louie continued as mainstays of Disney publications. They continued their appearances in the early comic strips and spun off into such publications as Mickey Mouse Magazine in the late 1930s, Walt Disney's Comics and Stories from the early 1940s, Walt Disney's Donald Duck from the early 1950s, Walt Disney's Uncle Scrooge from the early 1950s, in their very own debut comic adventure, Huey, Dewey and Louie Back to School in 1958, their own comic series, Huey, Dewey, Louie Jr. Woodchucks from the late 1960s through to the early 1980s, and then the Disney magazine of the 1980s. Throughout all their comic appearances over the years, many series of which continue to this day, Huey, Dewey and Louie are the second most published non-superhero comic book characters in history, next to only Donald himself, and 11th overall if superheroes are taken into account. The long-form storytelling of the 10-pager comics allowed writers to flesh out unique personalities for the three characters over the years, allowing for differentiation and greater narrative possibilities. However, the characters would still be coloured randomly depending on whatever the colourist fancied at the time. In 1983, the triplets would feature in an incredibly brief cameo in Mickey's Christmas Carol, the grand return of Disney animated characters to the screen, and would co-star in Sport Goofy in Soccer Mania alongside Scrooge and Goofy. In both appearances, they would appear in all red, remaining indistinguishable in films 50 years on. DuckTales would run from 1987 to 1990 and was one of the most popular series of the Disney afternoon block, and arguably the most beloved screen appearance of Huey, Dewey and Louie of all time. The series would see the trio being sent to live with their great Uncle Scrooge, where they would join him on many globe-trotting adventures while Donald left town to join the Navy. With an even longer form adventure storytelling format to play with, storytellers finally gave the three characters the individuality they had always deserved on the screen. In fact, it was the personalities that the characters had been given across decades of comics that inspired their depictions in the DuckTales series. Huey was presented as the leader of the group, usually the one behind the group's mischievous plans. Dewey was presented as the most intelligent, devising the materials needed during adventures, and Louie was presented as the kindest, most loyal member of the group, with a lot of bravery and a lot of heart. While the characters would be designed similarly to the classic shorts and comics, DuckTales would mark the first time that the characters would be given distinctive colours. To help us remember, late Disney archivist Dave Smith would once write, "The brightest hue of the three is red, Huey, the color of water, dew, is blue, Dewey, and that leaves, Louie, and leaves are green." Despite being given distinctive colors, the three still shared the same voice artist, this time round Russi Taylor, the current voice of Minnie Mouse. The popularity of DuckTales led to a spin-off movie titled DuckTales the Movie: Treasures of the Lost Lamp, which was released theatrically in 1990. It was the first feature to be released by Disney Toon Studios, then Disney Movie Toons. The characters would appear here in much the same designs and personalities as they had in the series. A few years later, Quack Pack would debut on the Disney Afternoon block. The series was aimed at older viewers in the teenage demographic and was designed as a new vehicle for Donald and now teenaged versions of Huey, Dewey, and Louie. The series was inspired by the classic Donald shorts and was seen as more of an extension of them than of DuckTales, the reason why Scrooge and many of the other supporting DuckTales characters never made appearances. In fact, Quack Pack was devised as a way of giving the triplets even more distinct personalities. Co-producer Toby Shelton would describe them as such. Huey is the smooth-talking wheeler-dealer who'd rather read the business section than the sports, Dewey is the philosopher-thinker of the trio, and Louie is the athlete. What he lacks in brains, he makes up for with pluck. The characters would retain their established colours, however would take on a more stylish 90s teen-inspired clothing design, and for the first time ever, they would even be voiced by separate voice artists instead of the same, to give them distinctive voices. In 1999 series Mickey Mouse Works, the trio would appear in a handful of cartoons inspired by the classic Disney animations, where they would once again go head-to-head against Donald in a series of friendly battles. Here they would take on their DuckTales designs and would once again be voiced by a single voice artist, this time round Tony Anselmo, the voice of Donald. In that same year's Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas, the three would appear in the same design, albeit with darker coloured shirts. They appeared in the Donald Duck segment, causing havoc for Donald and Daisy Duck on Christmas Day. They would once again be voiced by Russi Taylor. In 2001 series House of Mouse, the three would appear as the house band of Mickey's Club, in designs which sit somewhere between DuckTales and Quack Pack, appearing almost adolescent. They would often appear in more stylish gear, but would still retain their classic colouring on their clothing and musical instruments. Between 2002 and 2010, the three characters would make brief appearances in the Kingdom Hearts series of games, the first of which would mark their debut appearance in computer animation. Here they were designed off their established DuckTales appearances. However, 2004's Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas would mark their first screen appearance in CG animation, in a sequence which serves as a somewhat sequel to the classic short-inspired sequence in Once Upon, where they once again cause havoc for Donald at Christmas time. The three wouldn't appear in much Disney media until the 2013 Paul Rudish Mickey Mouse series, where they have had numerous cameo appearances, often alongside Donald and Uncle Scrooge. In this series, which takes inspiration from classic 1920s character animation, Huey, Dewey, and Louie all appear in classically inspired, albeit stylized designs, complete with pie eyes. Many of their outfits in their series pay homage to their classic shorts, however they retain their identifying colours established in DuckTales. Speaking of DuckTales, their most notable recent appearance is most definitely in the recently rebooted version, which began airing in 2017. Here, the three ducks appear in a more modern, angular design and wear contemporary, trendy clothing, which once again retain their respective colours. Huey wears a red polo shirt and is the only one of the three to now wear a baseball cap. Dewey wears a light blue long-sleeve shirt under a dark blue t-shirt, and Louie wears a green hoodie. In this reboot, the three retain their own individual personalities, however there's a small role reversal from the original series. Huey is now the brains of the group, Dewey is the fearless one, and Louie is the greedy one. It's been theorized that each character reflects an individual element of Scrooge's own personality. To further solidify the characters as three individuals, they are once again voiced by individual voice artists. And at that, it's over to you guys out there. What's your favourite Huey, Dewey, and Louie appearance over the last 82 years, and who's your favourite out of the three ducks? Huey, Dewey, or Louie? Fire away in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos, you like what you've seen, you'd like to see more like this in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now, and also hit that like button down below if you're feeling extra generous. Also, don't forget to check out my many social media accounts, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day.